with the recent death of the dog today, makes me really think back to. Now, granted, it hasn't even been a year since I've stopped believing in Jehovah's Witness doctrine. I guess it'll be a whole year in April, um, and so it's kind of weird to try to decipher and fix things, in your mind about what happens when people die and things like that. I know that nobody has the answers, and I don't definitely have the answers and things like that. But I just wanted to talk about like the morbid view of human life and just the lack of respect for it when you are a practicing Jehovah's Witness and you're awaiting the end times and you're just this life doesn't really matter. And so there's a couple of people I wanted to talk about. Um, I myself have had four childhood friends, from ages, 0 to 18, commit suicide who were raised Jehovah's Witnesses. Um, Now, Jehovah's Witnesses don't teach like other religions that those people are like in hell or that's the unforgivable sin. They used to teach that there was no hope for resurrection for someone that committed suicide, but they have since changed that doctrine, and now they answer with "we don't know." Um, I wish they would answer that with for most of their doctrinal questions is "we don't know," but instead they're very dogmatic about different things. And I remember as a witness when these kind of things happen, almost being envious of them, because when you are a witness, you are learned and trained to hate the world. Now, granted, as an ENTP, it's very easy to do that with SE Demon because you kind of don't like reality to begin with, and so it's pretty easy to be one, be a witness as that type. Um, but you think of these people and they killed themselves, and you almost think they're lucky. You know, I don't think that way now. Definitely since leaving and since having the scales off my eyes of you know ludicrous fairy tales, of hope and belief in something that you can't even prove or you have any kind of reasonable evidence to prove or to believe in it, but you do anyways. And now, granted, I do think that makes life easier when you do believe that everything is in God's hands and He's got a wheel, and you don't need to explain anything. You don't need to worry about that kind of stuff because He's in control, and so that kind of lifts off a lot of responsibility on you. But yeah, I remember always feeling like, oh, I wish. I mean, I used to wish that like I would die out in service, or I would die for my faith and get murdered. Become a martyr. That's something I really, really wanted, and so I didn't really feel too bad when someone killed themselves. And to other people, it's quite devastating. But when you're a Jehovah's Witness, it's not really, because you just look at it from an objective standpoint of, well, this life does not matter. All you got to do is prove yourself faithful. Now it's in Jehovah's hand, and Jehovah is merciful, and Jehovah will resurrect them, and so this life didn't matter anymore, and they'll have another chance to prove themselves loyal to him later on during a 1,000-year reign. And so you kind of dismiss a lot of those feelings and you just kind of just like ignore them. And I think all religions kind of do that in a way, whether you believe in reincarnation or whether you believe in a resurrection, whether you believe someone goes to heaven. You're like, well, this didn't matter because now they're in heaven looking down upon me playing music. And it's kind of just like a delusion, trying to convince yourself of something that you either have convinced yourself even though it's untrue, or you really know it's untrue, but it helps with the mourning process. And so I see religions as answering questions that are impossible to answer, and that's what they're doing with the best way they know how, with the limited perspective on life. After all, we only live, what does the Bible say, 70, and some extra mighty people live up to 80. you know um, I plan on living longer than that. I hope with my lifestyle I chose so that I can bypass that and actually enjoy my golden years, relative health. But I'm digressing. When I think about my brother, for instance, he died in 2007 or 6, 2006, sorry. Um, it was devastating to me, but as an ENTP, I got called by my sister when I was at work. Um, and I continued to work. I was waiting tables at the time, working in Yountville, California. And now, granted, my behavior was not flawless. One of the fellow servers noticed it, was like, "What's wrong?" I was like, "I just got a call from my sister. My brother's dead." And this should have been a good wake up call because they were so. Um, what's the word? I can't even think of the word. Sorry, I haven't slept all night. And commendating to me, and he took my tables. They sent me home, and they even gave me the tips from those tables still. These are just people I worked with, and, witnesses believe that there are no good people in the world, and, and everyone's selfish, everyone's under the control of Satan. And yeah, I mean, I was upset about it, mostly because I was worried about how it affected my family and things like that. My brother was never baptized as a witness, so he technically was not disfellowshipped. He was raised as one, but there was obviously the soft shunning from my family. Not necessarily from me. I remember him showing up at random times and playing video games with me, and I never really thought much of it. Granted, I'm a pragmatic, and so it didn't really bother me. But looking back at it now, I can't feel guilty for the life that he was in because I had little to do with it. When he died, I was only 21 or 22, and so there's no way I could have brought up that upbringing because my brother was an alcoholic. He actually was living on the street at the time, and I like to think if my parents and his family were not witnesses, how things would be different. Would have put them in rehab? Because witnesses don't really put their kids in rehab, because in their mind, and this is really hard to grasp for many people to understand unless you're in the religion itself. The reason why he's an alcoholic is because he's left Jehovah. He doesn't have mental illness. He doesn't have a problem with substance abuse. He doesn't have a problem with addiction. It's because he doesn't have enough faith. It's a spiritual problem. With witnesses, everything is a spiritual problem. That includes pedophilia is a spiritual problem. This is why they have pedophiles in the congregation. They keep returning and getting their sins forgiven because they confess. They don't view it as a mental illness. They don't view them as predators. They view them as spiritually ill. And so my parents, what do they say in the South? God bless their heart. Billy was an alcoholic. He lived on the streets and he was homeless because he didn't have faith. That was the reason. And so to me, when he died, yeah, I was upset, but I got over it pretty quickly. But a lot of the reason why I was able to get over so quickly, I think, was the fact that I thought he was better off. Because now he's no longer a street person. Now he's no longer an alcoholic. He is dead in the grave, not conscious of anything at all, like it says in Ecclesiastes 9:5. Um, Not burning in hell for alcoholism and not in heaven, for that reason. He was waiting for the promised paradise when, you know, Jesus comes back and starts resurrecting the dead. And so to me, he was no longer living a miserable life where he was bipolar and had a lot of emotional issues, a lot of issues with my father. His upbringing was a lot more screwed up than mine because remember, my parents had me at 43, and so I was kind of like I was the runt. I'm the youngest of 10, and so it was me and my brother, he's 6.5 years older than me. Him and I kind of lived a much different life than the other eight, a lot different life, and so I was 22, my brother was 40, so like 40 something, 40, 42, I think, maybe 44. And so there was definitely a disconnect there in the age differences and not a whole lot of upbringing together. I have memories of him back to age 3. I remember this is because my mother's in a cult telling me to stay away from him because he's dangerous because he smokes cigarettes or other something weird stuff. And so it's just kind of like the whole entire environment that he was in. I remember my sister. I typed to her as an INFP. Told him to his face that, oh, you can't talk to me until you come back to Jehovah. And granted, he wasn't baptized. Um, and so a lot of that, you gotta point the finger at something, and that's one of the issues I had with my parents, because there's a lot of depression, mental illness, and substance abuse in my family, and it's one thing to have like one case and saying it has nothing to do with parenting, nothing to do with the religion and things like that, but it was multiple cases of the literally the same problem over and over again. I have my oldest brother lives on the street too, by the way, but he's not dead. He's still alive. He's 62 years old. Um, my mother says that it's because he started smoking marijuana at 17 and left Jehovah, and that's why he got involved in cocaine, methamphetamine, and other things like that. And so, you gotta figure out some kind of correlation here, between the insane upbringing within the religion. And now, granted, you can say, well, look at me. I'm not like that. I've never done drugs in my life. I never really want to. But a lot of that had to do with me looking at my older brothers and sisters and not wanting to be like them. Um, Not wanting to go down that future. And I also grew up very unhealthy. And so my health, I didn't take for granted. That's why I care so much about it now. Granted, I'm not sleeping because of the dog dying. And so I think back to, if he wasn't raised a witness, what Billy would be different. Obviously he would be. Would it be better? Not necessarily. Alcoholism runs in my family who are not witnesses too, and so it's not like they caused the chemical dependency upon the sugar that alcoholics have, and but just it's a real screwed up situation, the way witnesses view death and the way I view death, and it wasn't that big of a deal. Life was cheap because everyone got resurrected anyways, and so you think when people died, you thought they were better off than what they are now, because you're so busy focusing on negatives, and when you look at reality, life has never been so good than it is right now, because all statistics, all stats show that we have the highest quality of life of any recorded history. There's no better time to live than right now. It's idiotic. And so, um, yeah, it's crazy, because yeah, when I had friends that committed suicide, I didn't mourn them like I should. You kind of shut off a lot of emotional issues as a witness, because you have to. Because you have to be able to shun, you have to be able to be callous to different things. You have to be okay with everybody you work with that are going to die in a coming genocide when Jesus returns and kills 8 billion people and only Jehovah's Witnesses survive. You have to understand that. And you have to understand that you believe in the scriptures of birds of the heaven flying down, and the call, go and eat the fleshy parts of the generals and of the kings and of the unwicked people. And my mom used to talk to me about this kind of crap, and even as a young boy, talking about, we had a pet bird, and she's like, oh yeah, when Armageddon comes, I'm gonna let her out of the cage, and Dusty's gonna fly out and eat human flesh off the ground. This is how she talks. This is how she talks. and so and it's just like, yeah, it's a very morbid religion. It's a very morbid view of life. And you don't think, I mean, you can blame all Christianity and Islam and those other religions like that when you look at how religion is connected with wars. Now, you can't blame it all for it, because you got like Pol Pot, you got Joseph Stalin, you have Mao, and yeah, they killed millions and millions of people under atheism, and so it's in, I guess, human nature, I guess, in some way or form. But with me personally, since becoming agnostic, I definitely view life a lot more sacred and a lot more cherished than I did in the past. And now when people die, it hurts, because this is all I know is the only life I have, and so now I have the dead dog that died this morning, and that's going to affect my life, you know. Um, if somebody in my family dies, it's going to affect my life, the rest of my life, because I'm not looking for that end goal of just Jesus coming back and everything's going to be fine. I no longer have that option. You can't unlearn what you've learned, and so now when you know the truth about the truth, you have to move on. And so just dealing with grief is a little bit different now, and because in the past, you had a very morbid view of death, and that's how witnesses believe, and that's how they think, because this life is cheap. This life is just about proving yourself faithful to God, and the true life will be after resurrection or after Armageddon, and that's it. And so, yeah, my dog died this morning at 1 o'clock, and so that's why I'm thinking about this kind of stuff. And yeah, I'd come to a realization that I will never see my grandmother again, or my brother again, or my four friends that committed suicide again. You know, that's something you have to come to grips with. You know, and future friends that die, things like that. So you need to be more open and honest with them, and tell people that you love them and that you care about them, and try to be nice as possible. Um, because I mean, as an ENTP, I did another video on ENTP grieving process about guilt, and so the last thing I want is to feel guilty about how I treated somebody, and that's not something I can live with. And so now that I have more of a stable, healthy view of death, um, it's driving me to be a better person and to be more caring and more loving. Well, anyways, that's my thoughts on the morbid view of death.